Well, welcome to week 31 of the story. Here we are at the final chapter of the story. It's been a journey that we began, seems like a long time ago. But we've now seen through the lens of the lower stories of the Bible what God is doing in his upper story, and he's never varied from what he set out to do in that upper story. It's been quite a journey from the beginnings in Genesis, and now we come to the conclusion in Revelation. In the beginning, we saw the dawn of time, and we are finishing the story with the end of time. Just what does the end of God's upper story look like? Well, we have John's Revelation. The historical setting for Revelation is important. Rome, as you know, is persecuting and trying to destroy the church. Believers have been beheaded and killed by wild animals, some dipped in oil and burned to death because of their faith in Jesus. John is the only living disciple now, and he's been exiled to the island of Patmos. This is the same John who wrote the gospel and those three little books here at the end of the New Testament. The believers must be in fear that the church is about to be eliminated, and without their leader, they may themselves lose heart. It would appear that Rome is in control of things, but things are not always what they seem. John's revelation, I believe, is shared to give the believers hope and assurance, and us too. Revelation is a book of images, though, sounds and numbers. John is told to write down what he sees. It would kind of be like us trying to describe the images in a comic book. Revelation is the only book in the Bible, though, that comes with a promise of blessing. Right at the very beginning, in verse 3 of chapter 1, it says, "Blessed is the one who reads the words of this prophecy, and are blessed are those who hear it and take to heart what is written in it, because the time is near." It may be difficult to understand and explain, but the blessing, folks, is in the reading. Revelation is a poetic description of all that will happen. It's a promise of all that God will do. It is only a glimpse of the end times, but it's given to raise our expectation and anticipation of that time. It's given for us. That's why when John wrote it, it's why God had him write it down, and it was for me and for you. It's a place where God paves his streets with what we value most, gold and precious stones. And you just walk on them in heaven. A place of no more tears and pain and disease, no violence and evil. It's a place of worship, and who wouldn't want to be there? That's the revelation. That's the picture. That's what John is revealing to us. The first image John describes is to give the believers courage. In Revelation chapter 1, starting in verse 12, he says, "I turned around to see the voice that was speaking to me. And when I turned and saw 7 golden lampstands, and among the lampstands was someone like the Son of Man, dressed in a robe, reaching down to his feet, and with a golden sash around his chest." The number 7 means complete, and so here we find Jesus in the middle of his complete church. He is the center, and he's in control, not Rome. Take heart, John's saying. It's not over. It may look like Rome is winning, but it's not over. God wins. Hang in there, children. He's not abandoned you. He will fulfill his promise. But also, Revelation kind of takes us, like the movies we saw and enjoyed, the Back to the Future. See, the images of Revelation point us back to Genesis and to what God is doing in the upper story. It emphasizes that God is at the center of creation. Now, many have gone to great lengths to explain how creation happened naturally apart from God. A lot of explanations. And the truth is, for many of them, it takes more faith to believe the explanation they give than to believe the scriptures. Let's look at the contrast that we look at here from Genesis and Revelation. You see, Genesis presents the creation of the heavens and earth. Revelation presents the new heavens and new earth. Genesis tells of the creation of the sun, moon, and stars. Revelation tells us there's no need of a sun because God will be the light. Genesis tells us of paradise lost. Revelation shows us paradise regained. Genesis tells us that Satan was in the first garden. Revelation tells us that Satan is banished forever from the new garden. Now the new and the new garden, in the new heavens and earth and New Jerusalem means rejuvenated, renewed, not replaced, but renewed, transformed. See, this is apocalyptic literature, meaning that it's about Jesus coming back in the end times. The emphasis is clear that we are to be ready, regardless of whether we live to see his return or die before he returns. We are to be ready. Now, what are some of the overarching themes in Revelation? Well, as we read and try to understand Revelation, what can we take away? Well, let me suggest to you there are three things that we can take away. First, everyone will someday stand before God. In Hebrews chapter 9 and verse 27 says, just as a man is destined to die once and after that to face judgment, we will all stand before the Lord. For the unbeliever, it will be a long, draining, and depressing reminder of a life filled with poor choices. But for the Christian, Christ will stand there and plead your case on your behalf. When John got a glimpse into heaven in Revelation 4, he saw that God was on his throne right in the middle of it. That's where he sits, and that's where we will one day stand before him. First, everyone will stand before God. A second takeaway from Revelation is this, is that God will keep his word. All throughout the story, we've seen that God wants to redeem us and reconcile us into a right relationship with himself. That message has never changed. His purpose has never changed, and his promise will not be broken. We get that from Revelation. But also, we see in Revelation a third thing, and that is that we need to be ready. Revelation 21, verses 7 and 8, warns us of the punishment faced by those who oppose Jesus. It says it this way, he who overcomes will inherit all this, and I will be his God, and he will be my son. But the cowardly, the unbelieving, the vile, the murderers, the sexually immoral, those who practice magic arts, the idolaters, and all liars, their place will be in the fiery lake of burning sulfur. This is the second death. One of the messages of Revelation is for all of us to be ready for his return by having placed our faith in Jesus, God's provision for us. For those who have put their trust in Jesus Christ, it would be the height of selfishness, one has said, if we didn't try to bring someone along with us into heaven. So the question is, who do you know is not ready? But in addition to that, what are you going to do about it? Well, as we conclude this, let me give you a parting thought. You know, it's easy to get caught up in the minutia of this revelation. Scholars have argued over things for centuries. We can argue over details about when and how this will happen, whether it's a pre-trib, a post-trib, whether it is premillennial, postmillennial, amillennial. But that discussion really is for another time and place. Let me share with you one of the greatest lessons I learned at seminary. As a college student, I attended a Campus Crusade retreat where Hal Lindsey was the speaker. He spoke about the second coming of Jesus, and it was so effective that when he finished speaking, we all rushed outside thinking for sure that Jesus was coming back right then, and we didn't want to have to go through the ceiling of the barn we were in. Those lectures became the basis for his best-selling book, The Late Great Planet Earth. My Old Testament professor in seminary, Clyde Francisco, took great exception to Lindsey's scholarship and explanation and expressed it forcefully one day in class, his opposition. On the way out of class that day, my roommate stopped Dr. Francisco and said, "Dr. Fran, I became a Christian after reading Hal Lindsey's book." And Dr. Francisco, without missing a beat, looked at us and he said, "Boys, here's a lesson for you. You don't always have to be right for God to use you." Wow, think about that. You don't always have to be right for God to use you. As we close, let's remember that the blessing is in the reading of the book and not get caught up so much in the minutia. Let's not argue and fret over some things and miss those things that are more important. Remember the important things, that everyone will someday stand before God, that God will keep his promises, that we need to be ready. Well, we've finished reading the story, but now we must go on living the story. Let me leave you with this charge that came from Aaron Brockett, the lead pastor of Traders Point Christian Church in Indianapolis. He said it this way: "When the apocalyptic dust settles, be sure you're standing with Jesus." And folks, that is a story worth knowing and telling. God bless you. Have a good evening.